I never imagined that one wrong turn on a quiet street could lead me to the most magical week of my life. My name is James, and this is how it all began. When I first booked my flight to Barcelona, I had no plans beyond rest. I wanted distance from my work, my inbox, my phone constantly buzzing with urgent messages that never felt urgent in hindsight. I longed for silence, for lazy mornings with nothing but the sound of coffee dripping, for afternoons spent in cafes watching people pass by, and for evenings where time had no meaning. The Gothic Quarter was the perfect setting for such a retreat. With its maze of narrow alleys, its weathered stone walls, and its echoes of centuries past, it was the kind of place where one could get lost and not mind at all. And that's exactly what happened. I had set out that morning with no destination in mind. My camera hung loosely around my neck, and I took photos of anything that caught my attention. A balcony overflowing with flowers, a shop window displaying hand-painted ceramics, a boy chasing pigeons across a square. At some point, I turned left when I should have gone right, and suddenly the street I was on grew quieter, emptier. It felt different here, almost secret. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifting from a cafe I couldn't yet see. I slowed my pace, letting the charm of the unexpected guide me forward. And then it happened. My foot caught on the uneven edge of the curb, and I stumbled forward, catching myself just before falling completely. Embarrassed, I looked around to see if anyone had noticed. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on the steps of a small cafe, tucked into the corner of the street, sketchbook resting on her knees. A loose strand of hair fell across her face as she drew, her pencil moving with quiet focus. But when she looked up and noticed me, her lips curved into a smile, warm, effortless, almost as if she had been waiting for me to appear. "Are you okay?" she asked in English, her voice gentle, carrying a lilt that was both comforting and curious. In that moment, the embarrassment of tripping vanished, replaced by something else, a spark, faint but undeniable. And just like that, with a single smile on a quiet street, my week in Barcelona began to transform into something I could never have planned. Her question lingered in the air, simple yet unexpectedly kind. "Are you okay?" I straightened up, brushing invisible dust from my jeans, and laughed lightly to cover my awkwardness. "Yes, just clumsy," I admitted. My words came out a little rushed, but her smile stayed steady and reassuring. She shifted her sketchbook to the side, tilting her head as she studied me for a moment. There was no judgment in her gaze, only curiosity, like she was trying to sketch me in her mind the same way she had been sketching the street. I noticed the smudge of graphite on her fingertips, the faint streak across her cheek where she must have brushed her hand absent-mindedly. She looked alive in a way that most people forget to be. "Do you always wander around looking like you've just discovered a new planet?" she teased gently. I chuckled. "Only when I'm lost." That made her laugh, and it was the kind of laugh that spread easily, like a melody you couldn't help but join. She closed her sketchbook, tapped it with her pencil, and said, "Well, then you've stumbled onto the right place. This is my favorite corner of the quarter. Do you want me to show you more?" I hesitated for a heartbeat. Normally, I was cautious with strangers, but something about her openness, her warmth, made the decision easy. "I'd like that." And so it began. We walked together through the labyrinth of Gothic alleys. She pointed out details I would have missed. Gargoyles peeking from rooftops, a door carved centuries ago, the faint traces of old Roman walls hidden between newer structures. With every turn, it felt like we were slipping further into another world, one woven from history, art, and quiet surprises. Eventually, she led me to a small square filled with the sound of a Spanish guitarist. The air was alive with music, and people gathered in a loose circle, clapping softly, swaying to the rhythm. We stood side by side, watching, neither of us needing to speak. When the song ended, we slipped into a nearby tapas bar. It was small and dimly lit, its wooden beams dark with age. Plates of patatas bravas, grilled shrimp, and thin slices of jamon appeared between us, and with them came stories. She told me about her love for sketching, how she traveled to capture not just places, but feelings on paper. I told her about my photography, about how I often hid behind the lens instead of living in the moment. You know, she said, dipping bread into olive oil, you don't seem like you're hiding now. And she was right. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about work, deadlines, or expectations. I was present, here, with her, in this tiny bar that smelled of garlic and wine, as the hum of Barcelona life spilled in through the open door. As the evening deepened, I realized something remarkable. What was meant to be a quiet, solitary trip had just taken an unexpected turn. A stranger had become a companion, and every step with her felt like the beginning of something larger. When we finally parted that night, promising to meet again the next day, I felt a flicker of anticipation I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just chance. It felt like destiny, disguised as a stumble on a quiet street. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Normally, I would have lingered in bed, scrolling through photos on my camera or sipping coffee without any rush. But today was different. I felt a quiet excitement, the kind that pushes you out of bed before the alarm even has a chance to ring. I met Olivia back at the same cafe where we had first crossed paths. She was already there, sketchbook in hand, a half-empty cup of Cordidu beside her. When she saw me approaching, she lifted her hand in a small wave, and just like that, the day seemed brighter. "Ready for more wandering?" she asked. "Always," I replied, though the truth was it wasn't the streets I was eager to explore, it was her. We set off without a map. The Gothic Quarter unfolded around us, like a puzzle we didn't want to solve too quickly. Every narrow street opened into another. Every corner revealed something unexpected. There was a shop selling handmade leather journals, where Olivia ran her fingers across the covers as though she could feel the stories waiting to be written inside. There was a hidden courtyard where laundry hung from balconies, creating a canopy of colors above us. At one point, we stumbled across a tiny bakery. The scent of fresh croissants was irresistible, so we bought two and sat on a stone bench to share them. The buttery flakes clung to our fingers, and Olivia laughed when I accidentally dropped a piece that a pigeon immediately claimed. "I think you made a friend," she teased. "More like a critic," I said. He looked disappointed there wasn't more. Her laugh carried through the square, light and unguarded, and I found myself memorizing the sound. Later, we followed the music of a street performer to a small plaza. A guitarist stood in the center, his fingers moving effortlessly across the strings. The melody was soft at first, then bold, filling the air with a kind of magic you couldn't capture in photos or words. Olivia closed her eyes as she listened, swaying gently to the rhythm. "Music like this," she whispered, "makes you feel like you're part of the city, even if you're only passing through." I wanted to tell her that she was the one making me feel part of something bigger, but instead I just nodded, afraid to break the spell. By the time the sun began to set, we had walked miles without realizing it. Our feet were sore, but neither of us wanted the day to end. We stopped at a tapas bar with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. Over glasses of sangria, we shared more stories about where we came from, what we dreamed of, and the little things that made us who we were. She told me she often traveled alone, not because she was lonely, but because she believed solitude opened doors to chance encounters, like ours. I told her I had forgotten how to let chance guide me, how routine had dulled my sense of wonder. "You found your way back," she said softly, her eyes holding mine. And in that moment, I realized she was right. This wasn't just a shared afternoon. It was the start of something I didn't yet have words for. When we finally parted that night, the streets were glowing under lantern light, and I knew with certainty tomorrow would not be the same without her. The next day began with an idea that wasn't mine. Olivia greeted me with a grin so mischievous that I knew she was up to something. "Today," she announced, "we're not walking." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, are we teleporting?" She laughed, shaking her head as she held up a pair of keys. Behind her, two scooters gleamed in the morning light, rented and waiting. "Barcelona is bigger than the Gothic Quarter, James. Time to see more of it, the real way." I had never ridden a scooter in my life, At least not beyond awkward test runs in parking lots. But there was no way I could refuse, not with her eyes sparkling like that. So, after a quick, stumbling lesson and a lot of nervous laughter, I found myself riding through the streets of Barcelona, Olivia effortlessly leading the way. The city felt different from this vantage point. The wind tugged at my shirt, carrying the scents of sea salt, grilled seafood, and blooming flowers from balconies above. The traffic hummed around us, a blur of locals, tourists, and the occasional honking horn, but somehow it all blended into a rhythm that felt exhilarating rather than chaotic. At one red light, Olivia pulled up beside me, her helmet tilted slightly as she smirked. "You're gripping those handlebars like you're holding on to life itself." "I am holding on to life itself," I shouted back over the noise, which made her burst into laughter so contagious that I couldn't help laughing too. Soon the city gave way to the coastline. The streets opened into wide boulevards lined with palm trees, and in the distance, the Mediterranean glittered under the sun like a sheet of liquid sapphire. When we finally parked near the beach, I pulled off my helmet with a shaky breath. "I survived," I said dramatically. Olivia tossed her hair and gave me a playful shove. "Barely, but you look cool doing it." We spent hours on the beach. The sand was golden, hot beneath our feet, and the waves crashed with the kind of rhythm that made everything else fade away. We took silly photos, striking ridiculous poses as if we were in some offbeat travel magazine. At one point, Olivia dared me to run into the waves fully clothed, and before I could refuse, she grabbed my hand and pulled me in with her. The shock of the cold water made us both scream and then laugh until our stomachs hurt. We splashed each other like children, our clothes soaked and heavy, but none of it mattered. For those moments, the world shrank to just the two of us. Our laughter, the sea, the sky stretching endlessly above. Later, we lay on the sand to dry, the sound of the waves mixing with the murmur of distant conversations and gulls overhead. Olivia drew shapes in the sand with her finger, waves, stars, even a clumsy attempt at my profile that made us both laugh again. "See," she said, squinting against the sun. "You do look heroic when you're terrified on a scooter." I rolled my eyes but smiled anyway. "Glad I could inspire your art." As the day slipped into evening, the horizon blushed with shades of orange and pink. We sat side by side, watching the sun sink into the water. There was a quiet between us, not awkward, but full, like silence was its own kind of language. In that moment, I realized something. Happiness didn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it was just two people, salty hair, sand in their shoes, and laughter echoing across the waves. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't want the day to end. It was supposed to be a short evening ride. After the beach, Olivia suggested we take the scooters out again and follow the coastal road, just until the city lights start to fade. But one road led to another, and soon Barcelona was behind us. The traffic thinned, replaced by stretches of dark water glimmering under the moon. The hum of our engines was the only sound besides the distant crash of waves. We hadn't planned on going so far, yet neither of us wanted to turn back. There was a pull, a strange freedom in not knowing where we were headed. By the time we slowed down, we found ourselves in a small port town, silent and still, as if it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. The streets were nearly empty. A few fishing boats swayed gently in the harbor, their ropes creaking with the rhythm of the tide. Lanterns glowed along the waterfront, their reflections shimmering across the black water. It felt unreal, like stepping into a painting that no one else could see. We parked the scooters and walked along the pier. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but I think from the quiet intensity of the moment. I wanted to offer her my jacket, but before I could, she slipped her hand into mine. I froze for a second, not from surprise, but because of how natural it felt, like my hand had been waiting for hers all along. "James," she whispered, her voice softer than the night breeze. "I think I've been waiting for this moment." The words hung between us, fragile, powerful, undeniable. My chest tightened, but not in fear, in recognition. Because I've been waiting too. I didn't try to answer with words. Instead, I turned to her, and she turned to me, and suddenly the silence of the port, the distant glow of the lanterns, the whole vast night seemed to draw us closer. Her eyes caught the light, deep, alive, searching, and I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. She smiled back. That was enough. We sat down on the edge of the pier, our legs dangling above the water. The town was so quiet it felt as though time had stopped just for us. Olivia pulled her sketchbook from her bag and opened to a blank page. With only the moonlight to guide her, she began to draw. Not the town, not the boats, but the two of us sitting there side by side. I don't usually draw moments while I'm still inside them, she admitted. But I don't want to forget this one. I didn't tell her that I didn't need a sketch to remember. Some moments etched themselves directly into the soul. When we finally rowed back, the road seemed different. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Because now, Olivia wasn't just someone I'd met by chance. She was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, but something I knew I didn't want to lose. The next morning, I woke with the memory of Olivia's hand in mine still lingering, like the echo of a song you can't shake. I kept replaying the night in the port town, the lanterns, the water, her whisper. It felt like a dream, but the kind you desperately hope never fades. When I met her later that day, she carried her sketchbook tucked under her arm as always. We found a quiet cafe away from the usual bustle, the kind where the chairs don't match and the waiter knows half the customers by name. The scent of strong coffee and warm bread filled the air. After we ordered, Olivia placed her sketchbook on the table. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers resting on the cover, almost protective. Then, with a small, almost shy smile, she pushed it toward me. "Do you want to see?" she asked. I hesitated. It felt like she was offering me something more than paper and pencil, something private, delicate. But her eyes were steady, inviting, so I nodded. Inside were pages filled with life. The first sketches were loose and playful, balconies overflowing with flowers, street musicians captured mid-note, children chasing pigeons across a square. But then I saw something familiar. It was me, the very first day, tripping on that uneven curb, frozen forever in graphite lines. She had caught the exact angle of my awkward stumble, my startled face, and, what made me laugh most, the camera hanging askew around my neck. "You sketched that?" I asked, grinning. She shrugged, feigning innocence. Artists notice everything. Besides, it was funny. As I flipped further, I found more. The guitarist in the plaza, his head bowed as though the music was pouring straight from his soul. The beach, us, laughing in the waves, drawn in quick strokes that somehow captured the chaos and joy. And then, the sketch from last night, two figures sitting on the pier, hands almost but not quite touching, lantern light glowing around them. I stared at it longer than I meant to. "You make it look like it was meant to be." Her voice softened. Maybe it was. I closed the sketchbook gently, handing it back as though it were fragile glass. "You're not just drawing places," I said. "You're drawing us. These moments." She tilted her head, considering. Maybe that's what art really is, holding on to what matters before it slips away. The weight of her words stayed with me. I realized how often I use my camera not to live moments, but to hide from them, to stay safely behind the lens. Olivia, on the other hand, captured life with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart. That afternoon, I barely touched my camera. Instead, I let myself be present, watching her laugh, listening to her stories, and realizing that some memories are better lived than photographed. And as the day slipped quietly into evening, I understood something. Her sketchbook wasn't just filled with drawings. It was becoming a record of us, a story that neither of us had planned, but both of us were writing together. By the 7th day of my trip, I thought I'd seen every side of Barcelona. The beaches, the bustling boulevards, the quiet Gothic alleys. But Olivia had a way of proving me wrong, of uncovering corners of the city I would have walked past without ever knowing what lay beyond. That morning, she told me she wanted to show me something special. She wouldn't explain, only grinned in that secretive way that made me both curious and impatient. We wound our way through streets narrower than my shoulders, where the laundry lines above us hung, like colorful flags, and the echoes of distant conversations bounced off the stone walls. Finally, she stopped before a heavy wooden door tucked into the side of a building. It looked like it belonged to a private home, weathered and ordinary. She glanced around, then pushed it open with a creak. On the other side was another world. The noise of the city fell away instantly. We stepped into a small courtyard garden bathed in dappled sunlight. Jasmine climbed up the stone walls, filling the air with its sweet perfume. In the center stood a fountain, the gentle trickle of water echoing like music in the silence. Terracotta pots overflowed with greenery, and a single wrought iron bench sat in the shade of an orange tree heavy with fruit. I stopped, stunned. "How'd you find us?" She smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I got lost once just like you. Some doors hide the best secrets." We sat on the bench together, and for the first time all week, neither of us felt the need to move. Hours passed unnoticed. We spoke in fragments, about childhood dreams, about the fears that chased us in the quiet hours of the night, about the kind of lives we wanted but hadn't yet dared to reach for. It felt strange how easy it was to be honest with her. With most people, I guarded my thoughts, afraid of being misunderstood or dismissed. But with Olivia, I could speak without hesitation, and she listened, really listened like my word mattered. At one point, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the soft weight of her presence settle over me. My heart pounded, but not in the wild, nervous way I expected. It was steady, calm, like it had found a rhythm that matched hers. "You know," she murmured, eyes half closed, "sometimes I think places choose us. This garden was waiting for me the first time I found it. Maybe it was waiting for us today." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around at the sunlight dancing across the fountain, at the vines curling up the walls, at the way her sketchbook rested between us like a silent witness. She might have been right. Some places felt too perfect, too intimate to belong to chance alone. When we finally left, the city rushed back in, the noise, the heat, the crowds. But inside, I carried a piece of that garden with me. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew the truth. It wasn't the garden I would remember most. It was the moment her head rested on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at home. Barcelona has a way of surprising you just when you think you've uncovered all its secrets. On my 8th night, the city seemed to transform before my eyes. Lanterns bloomed like stars along the streets. Banners hung from balconies, and music spilled from every corner. Olivia explained that it was a local festival, part tradition, part celebration, and entirely alive. We joined the crowd as the streets filled with people. Families, couples, tourists, locals, all blending into a single current of laughter and song. Drums echoed in the distance, and fireworks painted the sky in sudden bursts of red and gold. Every sound, every color, every spark seemed to pulse with life. Olivia's hand found mine without hesitation. It wasn't like in the quiet port town, tentative and new. This time it was confident, certain, as though the noise of the festival dared us to be braver. She pulled me into a circle where dancers spun, clapping to the rhythm of guitars. I hesitated at first, awkward and stiff, but Olivia twirled into the crowd, her laughter rising above the music. She extended her hand toward me, daring me to follow. And I did. We moved clumsily at first, my steps out of sync, but the rhythm caught me. Soon I was spinning with her, forgetting myself, forgetting everything but the warmth of her fingers and the sound of her laugh. Around us, strangers cheered and clapped, but in my world there was only her, Olivia, radiant in the glow of lanterns and firelight. Later, when the dancing slowed, we wandered down a side street strung with paper lights that swayed gently in the breeze. The crowd was still close, but here the noise softened, leaving us in a cocoon of golden glow. "I love nights like this," she said, her voice hushed as though speaking louder might shatter the magic. "When the world feels too alive to sleep." I studied her in the light, the way her hair caught the colors, the way her eyes reflected the flickering lanterns. She looked both part of the festival and separate from it, as if she carried her own fire inside her. Without thinking, I said, "You make it feel like the city is celebrating us." Her smile was small but full, and she leaned closer, resting her forehead against mine. The world spun around us. Fireworks, laughter, music, but in that quiet closeness, it all faded. There was only her breath against my skin, the rhythm of her heartbeat pressed into me. We kissed then, not rushed, not tentative, but with the certainty of two people who had been moving toward that moment since the very first stumble on a quiet street. The festival continued long into the night. But for me, everything after that kiss felt like an afterglow, a blur of light and sound carried by the knowledge that something had shifted. The city might have been celebrating its traditions, but for us, it felt like the universe had joined in. The morning after the festival felt different. The streets were quieter, though still alive with the remnants of celebration. Lanterns swaying gently, confetti sticking stubbornly between cobblestones, the faint smell of fireworks lingering in the air. But inside me, there was a heaviness I couldn't shake. I had known this moment would come. From the very beginning, there had always been a shadow at the edge of our days together. My trip was temporary. Hers too. Barcelona had been a crossing of paths, not a destination we could both stay in forever. We met at the cafe where it all began. Olivia was already there, sketchbook closed on the table, her fingers tracing the cover as though she was memorizing its texture. When she looked up at me, her smile was soft, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She felt the weight of goodbye as much as I did. "So," she said lightly, "when's your flight?" "Tomorrow morning," I answered. The words came out heavy, reluctant. She nodded. "Mine's in 2 days." A pause. Strange, isn't it? A city can feel like forever, and then suddenly it's just a place you leave. We decided not to spend our last day sitting in silence. Instead, we walked through the streets we had explored together, through plazas where echoes of music still lingered, past the little shops where she had paused to sketch and I had paused to photograph. Every step was a memory, and every memory felt sharper because I knew it was the last time. At sunset, we returned to the hidden garden. The jasmine still scented the air, the fountain still whispered softly, but it all felt different now, tinged with farewell. We sat on the bench in silence for a long time, the way we had before, but now our hands were clasped tightly, unwilling to let go. "I wish," she began, then stopped, her voice breaking off into the evening air. "I know," I whispered. I didn't let her finish because the words didn't matter. Wishes couldn't bend time. As the light faded, she pulled out her sketchbook one last time. She flipped to a blank page and began to draw, quickly, almost desperately. Her pencil scratched across the paper, and when she was done, she tore the page carefully, folding it before pressing it into my hand. "Something to take with you," she said. I opened it later when I was alone. It was us, not stumbling or laughing or running into waves, but simply sitting on that bench in the hidden garden, heads tilted toward one another, like two people who had found home for a brief, impossible week. That night, we said goodbye on the street outside her hostel. The city buzzed faintly in the background, but to me, it felt like the world had gone silent. We held each other for what felt like hours, both knowing that time would tear us apart anyway. When we finally pulled away, she kissed me softly, almost reverently, as if sealing the memory. "Promise me something," she whispered. "What?" "Don't let this week become just a story you tell yourself one day. Let it be more than that." I promised. Though I didn't know what more meant yet, I knew I would spend the rest of my life searching for it. And as I walked away, the folded sketch pressed against my chest, I realized something. Goodbyes are not always endings. Sometimes they're beginnings in disguise. Back home, everything felt both familiar and strange. My apartment smelled the same, my city buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside me, something had shifted irrevocably. I carried Barcelona with me, not just in photos or souvenirs, but in memory, in the faint ache of a week too beautiful to forget. The sketch Olivia had given me rested on my desk, its lines delicate and alive. I often stared at it, tracing the edges with my fingers, remembering the way the sunlight had hit the garden fountain, the warmth of her hand in mine, the sound of her laughter echoing across the waves. That one week had become a tapestry of moments, stitched together by chance, by courage, by laughter, and by a spark neither of us had expected. I found myself thinking differently about life. Work still demanded attention, bills still needed paying, and routine still called my name. But I approached each day with a newfound awareness, a reminder that magic exists in the ordinary if you allow yourself to see it. A glance at a stranger, a wrong turn down an unknown street, a laugh shared over spilled croissants. All of it mattered. All of it could become a memory that changed you. Weeks passed, and our emails turned into messages, our messages into late-night calls, our calls into plans to meet again. Distance had never felt so close. Every time I thought of Barcelona, I no longer saw it as a city I visited. I saw it as the place where I found something I hadn't known I was missing: connection, wonder, and a sense of living fully in a single fleeting moment. And Olivia? She became more than a memory. She became a reminder that life's beauty is often unexpected, that the most magical experiences come when you least plan for them. And that love, the kind that sneaks in through chance encounters, is worth holding on to, even across oceans. Sometimes, late at night, I pull the sketch from my desk, now slightly worn at the edges, and smile. I can almost hear the waves, almost hear her voice, almost feel her hand in mine. That week in Barcelona wasn't just a story I tell. It's a part of me, an afterglow that will never fade, no matter where I go. Because some moments, once they touch your heart, never really leave. And as I close my eyes, I know one thing with certainty: life is richer, brighter, and infinitely more alive when you allow yourself to stumble into the unexpected.